Can you take a moment just to breathe, just to be? Let's do that. Let's just take a breath together. Happy New Year, everyone. I'm Barbara Hove, and I have the privilege and pleasure of serving as your consulting minister this year. And it's really hard to believe, but I have been with you now for 6 months, and I am halfway through my year among you. Time, this strange linear time thing, moving so fast. But the new year is such a great moment in time, isn't it? To just take a moment to breathe and to be and to recognize where we've come from, but not get too excited about where we're going, but rather be right here where it's possible to just take a breath and to be. One of the great gifts for me of breathing and being here with all of you this year has been the extraordinary opportunity I have to work with your leaders, with your staff. And over the Christmas season, I got to do some work with your kids, which was super fun for me because I don't really get to do stuff with the kids. So thanks, kids. Those of you, you know who you are. But I also think it's a wonderful gift for me that each Sunday I share this dais with a Sunday service associate. And this wonderful team works with me to help make sure that worship here is meaningful, it has depth and purpose, and it's a wonderful group of people. And this morning, we get to hear a story from Ryan.
One of my personal pet peeves is when people talk about the best day of your life, because there's a small subset of culturally acceptable answers. Your wedding day, the day your children was born, maybe a graduation or citizenship ceremony, all of which are days you don't so much look forward to as look forward to being over. Now, I've never gone through the agonizing ordeal of watching a woman give birth, but I did get married, and let me tell you, that was not the best day of my life. I was awake for almost 24 hours and had to be on for pretty much that entire time. People told me that the food was amazing, but I was too stressed to eat any of it. And as a result, I got a sinus infection that ruptured my eardrum prior to the honeymoon. That was my wedding day. An important day, sure, a milestone, but not a good day by any measure. And certainly not the best day. Not even one of my top 10 best days for May 2015. The best day of my life was probably the day I got laid off. Not only did I suddenly have the rest of my day free, and in fact, several months after that, but an entire category of worry and stress just dissipated like morning dew. All the work I was behind on, the emails I hadn't answered, and the people I had to harass for answers, none of it was my problem anymore. On top of that, all the things I'd been wanting to do but hadn't had time for, now I had nothing but time. All at once, the future opened up in front of me like a train emerging from a tunnel onto the prairies. Sometimes we don't recognize how much weight we carry from our own and others' expectations until it's been lifted. And so this morning, I dedicate the lighting of our flaming chalice to those times of crisis and opportunity, which the Simpsons dubbed Chrisotunity. We kindle this flame as a symbol of our gathering.
May the light of understanding illuminate our darkness. May the warmth of sharing bring us peace.
I come from a pretty high-achieving family. My father used to brag about how his father, the doctor, with his 12 brothers and sisters, had amongst them 39 advanced degrees. My dad had 3 earned degrees and an honorary doctorate. And my mother, perhaps because she was the first in her family to go to college, placed an enormous emphasis on education. Her 4 children were to go to college and to do extremely well therein. So, when at age 19, my parents had to drive to Vermont from Washington, D.C., where I lived, to rescue me from a summer camp job at which I had failed miserably, then take me back home instead of back to college where they thought I belonged, I felt like a huge failure. I had given up on professional theater as my life's work. My health had broken, showing signs of what would ultimately be diagnosed as fibromyalgia. I had dropped out of school, and I had no money. It was one of the bleakest times in my life. I felt like a failure, and other than the fact that I was still pretty young, on most scales, I had indeed failed in my work and education goals. Not to mention disappointing my parents in a big way. Now, I expect if I were to go around this room this morning, we might hear a few stories not unlike my own. I was 19 when I had my first real experience of failing. Perhaps you were a bit older, perhaps a bit younger, but odds are most, if not all of us in this room have experienced the bitter taste of failure. It pretty much happens to all of us at some time or another. And if you were like me, you probably felt terrible about it. I can still remember getting into my parents' car up there at that camp in Vermont and driving away. I wouldn't even look out the window. I lay down on the back seat because I was too embarrassed to look out the window at my friends waving goodbye to me. And it only got worse as I came home to no school, no job, and for as far as I could see, no future. Perhaps this sounds a bit melodramatic. Humans tend to be so at 19. But as I thought about what I needed to share with you today, I allowed myself a few minutes to remember what it felt like to be an abject failure in my own mind and heart, and to remember how that experience shaped me into who I am today. For this morning, I want to look at failure not as a weakness, but as a strength. To explore the ways that failure doesn't just close doors, but as Ryan reminded us, opens them too. And I do so knowing that Unitarians can struggle a lot with failure. We are high-achieving folks, just like all the members of my family. We are people for whom being called a failure can be one of the worst curses thrown our way. Success is the virtue. And if, God forbid, we end up losing a job, having a loved one leave us, or failing in school, we are nothing but a loser. Now, this may be a bigger issue in the States where I come from, but I kind of think it might be true here in Canada with some of you, maybe. Well, this morning I want to explore how we might change our relationship to failure by looking at it not as a problem to be avoided at all costs, but as an actual spiritual strength. And one interesting place that I went to see the strength within failure was to, of all people, J.K. Rowling, the author of the wildly successful Harry Potter books. Some years ago, Rowling was invited to speak at the graduating class at Harvard. Imagine the scene for a moment. Harvard University, a school for the best and the brightest. J.K. Rowling, the author of one of the most successful, probably the most successful children's book series of all time, and a multi-millionaire. I mean, you'd expect her to talk about success, right? But no. What she talks about is failure. And here are her words. And though I've cut quite a lot of it, she spoke quite movingly about imagination. It's still a lengthy quote, which I've asked Ryan to read for you.
Ultimately, we all have to decide for ourselves what constitutes failure, but the world is quite eager to give you a set of criteria if you let it. So I think it fair to say that by any conventional measure, a mere 7 years after my graduation day, I had failed on an epic scale. An exceptionally short-lived marriage had imploded, and I was jobless, a lone parent, and as poor as it is possible to be in modern Britain without being homeless. The fears that my parents had had for me and that I had had for myself had both come to pass, and by every usual standard, I was the biggest failure I knew. Now, I'm not going to stand here and tell you that failure is fun. That period of my life was a dark one, and I had no idea that there was going to be what the press has since represented as a kind of fairy tale resolution. I had no idea then how far the tunnel extended, and for a long time, any light at the end of it was a hope rather than a reality. So why do I talk about the benefits of failure? Simply because failure meant stripping away all of the inessential. I stopped pretending to myself that I was anything other than what I was, and began directing all my energy into finishing the only work that mattered to me. Had I really succeeded at anything else, I might never have found the determination to succeed in the one arena I believed I truly belonged. I was set free because my greatest fear had been realized, and I was still alive, and I still had my daughter who I adored, and I had an old typewriter and a big idea. And so rock bottom became the solid foundation on which I rebuilt my life.
That statement is powerfully moving and terrifically true. Hitting rock bottom can indeed be a solid foundation on which to build a life. Ask any alcoholic or drug addict who has found their way towards sobriety, and they will tell you the same thing. There's a reason folks in 12-step programs talk about the benefits of hitting bottom. It's really true that for many of us, we can't focus on who we are and what we are meant to do without landing hard and often on our bottoms. While my moment of failure carried with it the safety valve of parents who loved me and were willing to take me home, it was certainly true that my 19th summer knocked me down hard. And yet that miserable season when my life imploded offered new possibilities for me. It led me back to the church. It helped me see that I wasn't alone, that my parents accepted me, even if I wasn't the best student, the greatest actor, the sweetest and nicest of all their daughters. I was and could only be myself. And out of that knowledge, a tiny flame of religious yearning was nurtured, and within 3 years, I was a college graduate, heading to seminary and a new life as a Unitarian Universalist minister. I won't say picking myself up was easy, but I managed. And though there have been other moments of failure since then, I learned that summer that failing did not make me a failure. I could and did find ways to get back on my feet and move on. And I think that's what makes failure a powerful spiritual strength. Failing can teach us what really matters. As J.K. Rowling said, it can drain away the inessentials. It can be an open door into something new. It can help us feel under our feet the rock that sustains us. Now, don't get me wrong. Like J.K. Rowling, I recognize that failure isn't pretty, and I know that for many people, the rock bottom onto which they fall can damage, even kill. For some, the world offers not open doors, but painful barriers, and it can truly be too much to fail over and over again. And sometimes failure comes through no fault of our own, and if there is no one there to help us up, or no hope that things will get better, failure can wither away all that is beautiful inside and lead us to despair. But there is wisdom out there to help us navigate through our failures and perhaps keep us from succumbing to despair. Hear Ryan read these words from the great rabbi and writer Harold S. Kushner from his book, Overcoming Life's Disappointments.
Every disappointment, every rejection, every dream that doesn't come true leaves a wound in a person's soul. Major setbacks, divorce, bereavement, infertility, crippling illness, losing your job, leave permanent scars. Small disappointments, being passed over for a promotion, having a close friend suddenly too busy to find time for you, leave smaller wounds, but wound nonetheless. The question is not, can I get through life without suffering some failures and rejections? Because you can't. And the more you aspire to in your life, the more you yearn for, the more scars you will accumulate along the way. The real question is, how will you respond to those disappointments? Will you respond with bitterness, envy, and self-doubt, or with resilience and wisdom?
Kushner really nails it, doesn't he? How will we get up from the inevitable failures, pain, and loss that we sang about in our hymn? One way is to recognize that these failures and these losses are like the water that flowed out of the cracked pot. Yes, it's true that the water didn't make it to the destination, so in a very real sense, that cracked pot failed. But it also watered flowers along the way. Because something unexpected opened up in that pot, good things emerged. It's rather like that old adage about doors. When one door shuts, sometimes another one opens. And it's that openness that really matters, isn't it? And yet if we're so afraid of failing, we're often unable to open a door when another one closes. So I think we might imagine failure as a spiritual strengthening program, not unlike exercise. And doing so is particularly important for a lot of us in this room. As Unitarian Universalists, we are, generally speaking, well-educated and privileged. We have many gifts which we are called to use and have expectations that we will offer them through our work, our families, or our community involvement, including our involvement here. We set high standards for ourselves. It's something Unitarians do. When my husband Jocko and I moved to Bainbridge Island, Washington in 2008 to serve Cedars Unitarian Universalist Church, we found a community quite a lot like this one. A lovely place to live with a lot of folks with advanced degrees and high-achieving lives. So it didn't surprise me when I heard them speak an affirmation each Sunday that assured the people saying it that they would take good care of the earth, treat all people kindly, and live lives full of love and goodness, because that is how we will all become the best that we can be. We said that every single Sunday. It's a grand and glorious dream. I found their repeating of this affirmation curious, not because I didn't share some of their highfalutin dreams of how best to build a better world. It was more because I was partly responsible for bringing a version of this affirmation to the region when in 1985 I started my ministry at East Shore in Bellevue, Washington, and introduced those words to the community there. But the original version, written by that famous person, Anonymous, included a very important word that went missing in the version they used on Bainbridge Island. In the original, the word try is in there. We were to try to live lives full of love and goodness, not simply live them. Now, removing that little word makes a world of difference, doesn't it? Trying challenges us, but does not promise success. Remove that verb, and you make failure impossible. And yet, failure is always possible. There is no way we cannot, at least occasionally, fail to live up to such wonderful ideas. I mean, how in the world can we always live lives full of love and goodness? How can we always take care of the earth and be kind to each and every person we meet? How can we live our 7 principles every single day? It's impossible. We will definitely fail. And I don't think that's so bad. Learning to fail is a crucial lesson in becoming human. It's rather like learning to fall is for an athlete or a dancer. If you can't learn to fall or fail with grace, you are going to get hurt far more frequently than if you can allow yourself to hit that rock bottom with your feet under you rather than landing head first. How do we learn to accept failure as inevitable, yet not let it lead us to misery and despair? How do we pick ourselves up from that rock bottom and move on? Is there a spiritual practice that can help us fall gracefully, but still keep on dancing? Well, I think the first step is to give ourselves permission to make mistakes. Now, I know there are a lot of scientists in this congregation, and you all know that mistakes are invaluable because they help us see what isn't working, what doesn't fit. Accepting our mistakes and learning from them requires humility, a willingness to say, I don't know, I may be wrong. Oh my goodness, I messed up. Now, we can start in small ways to do this. Learning to apologize is critical. But so is letting go of the tendency to beat ourselves up when those inevitable failures and mistakes occur. For the second step is to forgive ourselves for being imperfect and to forgive others for noticing. Yeah. We can't let failure morph into despair. We can't let our own recklessness, our stupidity, our boneheaded ignorance, those lovely qualities that led us to screw up in the first place, have the final word. We can and should learn from our mistakes, but we can't learn from them if we let that mistake be the guiding star of our life. Some people seem to hold on to their failure to justify everything else bad that they or others do that follows, unable or unwilling to learn from their mistakes, ask forgiveness, and move on. Failure is only a strength if it leads us toward better choices, kinder motives, and deeper hope. Failure is only a strength if it helps us see that new door opening even as an old door slams shut. Finally, a powerful spiritual practice that can emerge from failure is an ability to say yes to life and love and hope, even when we know that we will make mistakes again. We will fail over and over. Recognizing that failure is not a description of who you are, Oh, you're a failure. I'm a failure. Oh, but a verb. Oh, you failed. I failed. We fail, but that doesn't mean we are failures. We are human. We make mistakes. We fail. We ask forgiveness. We try again. We move on, and the cycle continues. If we can see our failings and our mistakes as tools that guide us toward making better decisions and not as weapons to beat ourselves and others up with, we have the potential to, as the wise Rabbi Kushner reminded us, respond not with bitterness, envy, and self-doubt, but with resilience and wisdom. We can, with J.K. Rowling, discover that with failure comes freedom, the freedom to live knowing that even if our worst fears are realized, we can be strong and find the courage to move on. I wish it were easy. I wish we could learn as much from the blessings of life as we do from the hard and sometimes bitter challenges that face us all. But the spiritual path is not an easy path. It requires of us courage to face with faith our fears and our failures and to move past them. It asks us to sing boldly. Just as long as I have breath, I must answer yes to life. Though with pain I made my way, still with hope I meet each day. If they ask what I did well, tell them I said yes to life.
Just as long as vision lasts, I must answer yes to truth. In my dream and in my dark, always that elusive spark. If they ask what I did well, tell them I said yes to truth.
Just as long as my heart beats, I must answer yes to love. Disappointment pierced me through, still I kept on loving you. If they ask what I did best, tell them I said yes to love. And these are the words to this wonderful song that we're invited now to sing together. Hymn number 6, Just as Long as I Have Breath. I invite you to rise in body and or spirit as we'll sing together.